Please welcome our first Korean speaker as well as panelist. Sunjin Yoon is the co-chairperson of the 2050 Carbon Neutrality Commission of Republic of Korea. Sunjin earned her PhD in environmental and energy policy at University of Delaware. She has dedicated most of her career to promoting and addressing environmental and energy matters through vigorous research, lectures, and various social activities. Her previous positions include ex-chairperson of Sustainable Development Committee, ex-chairperson of Energy Policy Committee of Seoul Metropolitan Government, and much more. Today, Sunjin will talk about 2050 carbon neutrality in the context of responding to the global climate crisis and enhancing global health security. Ladies and gentlemen, it is a great pleasure to introduce Sunjin Yoon.
Thank you for your invitation and introduction about me. Actually, we have a translator, interpreter. I think it is better for me to speak in Korean because anyway, one translation is necessary. So for me, speaking Korean is better. Yeah, so let me talk in Korean from now on. 네, 안녕하세요. 방금 소개받은
Good afternoon, everyone. Was just introduced. My name is Sunjin Yoon. I'm the co-chairperson of the 2050 Carbon Neutrality Commission of the Republic of Korea. I am also teaching as a professor at the Environmental Graduate School of the Seoul National University. As was introduced, I'm going to be talking about the global climate crisis and also our response and also Korea's 2050 carbon neutrality strategy and how all of this relates to the global health security and how we're going to enhance the global health security. So the previous speaker had talked about the COP26, which was held in UK's Glasgow. And just before that, the WHO issued a report. And it said that the burning of fossil fuels is killing us. The title of the report is very strong, as you can see. So it's actually a special report. And it's titled, "The Burning of Fossil Fuels is Killing Us," and it talks about climate change and health. So the WHO had issued this special report just before the COP26, and this is just a summary of the special report. Climate change or climate crisis is most importantly threatening our health. And it's the single biggest health threat facing humanity. Of course, we are facing the COVID-19 pandemic. The source of the pandemic has not yet been scientifically proven, but many researchers and many academics say that this kind of pandemics and diseases actually has climate change as its background. Of course, there are many contributing factors, but we are burning fossil fuels, we are cutting down forests, and so the CO2 emission is increasing because there is no source of absorption for the CO2 that has been emitted. And so cutting down the forest or reducing the forest is also leading to the loss of animals. And so the distance between humans and animals or wild animals has become a lot closer. Humans are crouching more and more into their habitat, whereas the wild animals, because it's really difficult to find food, is crouching more towards a human life. And so there are many viruses that has hosts, has humans as hosts, which previously did not happen, and that is now becoming infected also humans, and some of the viruses are also living in animals as well. And with the temperature rise, bats are now moving its habitat to the southern part of China, which is more livable for bats. And so there are now more mediations for viruses. And so you can see that this kind of atmosphere and the climate is impacting pandemics. Fine dust is also very severe in Korea. With the temperature rise around the globe, the North Pole temperature is rising more. And so that means that the speed of the wind is reducing. And so that means that the atmosphere is standing still in many of the days because there's no wind. And so that is leading to more fine dust and pollution. If there is wind blowing, that would decrease the standstill of fine dust in the atmosphere. But the speed of the wind is changing, leading to more air pollution. And so you can see that the climate change, the climate crisis is aggravating the air pollution and thus impacting our health. And so basically, this is what the WHO special report is talking about. Anyway, due to climate change, there is more pollution in the air, and actually, the WHO guideline says that bringing down the air pollution would reduce the total number of global deaths by air pollution by 80%. Yes, so if we abide by the WHO guideline and bring down air pollution to that level, the number of deaths around the world could be reduced by 80%. This is actually in the special report. And another thing I'd like to mention is that according to the WHO special report, air pollution mainly comes from burning of fossil fuels. And in fact, it goes on to say that it is responsible for 13 deaths per minute around the world. So if we are able to limit the global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius, then that could save millions of lives. And if we are able to maintain 1.5 degrees Celsius, as was agreed at the COP26, then we will contribute to improving the air quality. And that in turn will benefit human health. Because cleaner air means that people will be performing more outdoor activities, engage in sports, and also our diet will also change. Our diet has to change in order to respond to climate change. So in that regard, our overall health will improve. So going towards net zero is beneficial for our health. And also, if you look at some of the reports that come out of US CDC, it says that climate change decreases the quality of air that we breathe. So if you look at this report from the CDC, it talks about how climate change is interrelated to human health. And if you look at ozone, if it's in the stratosphere, then that can actually benefit humans and animals and plants. But when it comes to ground level ozone, it negatively affects human health. It has an adverse effect on the respiratory system of humans. Because like I said, ozone layers makes the wind stand still, and also that leads to a higher level of fine dust in the air. So now let me talk about some of the Koreans' efforts in enhancing air quality. Until recently, on the average, the fine dust has actually improved somewhat, but many people are paying a lot of attention, and that's because the high density number of days is increasing, and now some of those high density days are prolonged. So from 2019, Korea adopted a fine dust seasonal management program. So after the plan was adopted, then the plan and the management plan was implemented. And so actually, in the beginning of the plan, you had a whole week of very high level of fine dust. But many people are also interested not just in the density or the level of pollution per day, but also in how many days that kind of period is prolonged. And so anyway, in the beginning of the management program, it was severe over a whole week. And there was also a special committee that was formed to implement this management program. And in April 2020, another measure was planned and also started to be implemented. So here on the right-hand side, you can see that the air quality had improved since the adoption of the fine dust seasonal management program. You can see that after the second program, it has actually, the density has decreased, the number of days of good air quality has increased, and the days of bad air quality has decreased. Actually, the COVID-19 also has contributed because people's mobility and movement had decreased, and that led to the decrease of pollution. But you can see that, in fact, overall, the adoption of the fine dust seasonal management program contributed to enhancing the air quality. And you can also see the average for the past 3 years, and just after the first seasonal management period and after the second seasonal management period, you can see that the average air quality had improved. But it depends on the region. On the Gangwon province, on the right-hand side, you can see that there was great improvement, but in the case of the metropolitan area and the Chungcheong province, you can see that there is still room for improvement. That's because there's a high density of population and there's a lot of motor vehicles in the metropolitan city. And in the Chungcheong area, there are also many coal-fired power plants. In fact, half of Korea's coal-fired power plants are located in the Chungcheong area, in the center of Korea. So anyway, with the seasonal management program targeting fine dust, we have been able to improve the air quality. So these are some of the major positive outcomes of the management program. I won't be able to go through everything, but just to pinpoint a few important aspects. First of all, we have been working to reduce the number of the coal-fired power generation. Once we are able to reduce the use of coal, then we can get more synergy. Fine dust is decreased, and also carbon emission is also decreased at the same time. And so during the seasonal management program, we stopped operation of 12 generation plants, and also the capacity was running at levels less than 80%. Also, we have been able to decrease the use of fossil fuels in the transportation area. And that also went for the urban areas. There was a limit, a constraint of the number of motor vehicles able to operate in the urban centers. So now let me talk about the 2050 carbon neutrality strategy. So that was announced in August. And after the plenary session of the Carbon Neutrality Committee, there was an approval of the final draft, and that also was passed in the State Council. And there was also a process to garner public consensus. Anyway, Plan Scenario 1 was done away with, and we ended up with Scenario 2 and 3. And that was also divided into Plan A and Plan B. So in the case of coal-fired power plants, there are about more than 50. And recently we had 2 more, and 5 coal-fired power plants are still under construction. And so we have to stop construction of the new power plants, or we have to close the existing ones. But it's really difficult to close the coal-fired power plants forcefully, and we don't have the legislative grounds to do that. And also, a lot of it is owned and licensed to the private sector, so it's difficult to forcefully close down the coal-fired power plants. And so we did away with scenario 1, and so our suggestion was to try to close the coal-fired power plants more earlier on. So then that left us with Plan A and Plan B. The difference between Plan A and Plan B is the level of energy transformation. And so in the case of A, we have no carbon-based power generation, but in Plan B, we use LNG, which is a form of a fossil fuel. And so in both scenarios, coal is zero. So at COP26, President Moon made a keynote speech, and he said that by 2050, we're going to do away with the coal-fired power plants. And that's precisely because we have this kind of carbon neutrality scenario where we have been able to do away with the coal-fired power plants. In the case of 2030, NDC, we now have a great improvement. By 2030, in the NDC, we have raised the percentage, the goal, to 40% compared to that of 2018. Actually, there have been a lot of pros and cons regarding our target, but Korea still has a high proportion of manufacturing. In many of other countries, their proportion of manufacturing is quite small. For example, Europe's average is 14%, and Japan's manufacturing sector accounts for only about 11%. Germany is something like 12%. And in Korea, the manufacturing sector accounts for 26 to 29% of our industry. So it's not very easy, but we do have to go along with this road. So we are facing or aiming for 2050 carbon neutrality. And so we had raised our target for 2030 to 40% of that of the 2018. So our baseline of 2018 is very close. So we only have a short period of time where we can work on. But nonetheless, we are determined to go along that road. And so I want to focus a little bit on energy transformation. We have to decrease the amount of fossil fuel that is used in creating or generating electricity. And if you look at the third electricity basic plan or the ninth energy basic plan, you can see that there is a gradual coal phase-down plan. And so we are expecting our fossil fuel-based electricity generation, in other words, coal-fired power plants, by 2024. So that will be a peak year, and then there will be a phase out of the use of coal. In fact, during the COP26, there was a global coal to clean power transition statement, and it was about a transition towards a cleaner power generation, and Korea also participated and signed onto the statement. Since 2019, we had the International Day of Clean Air for Blue Skies. It was proposed by President Moon. And so this year, on 7th of September, we had the second International Day of Clean Air for Blue Skies. And so today, we are here at Nordic Talks. So I just want to close by talking a little bit about the possibility of collaboration between the Nordic countries and Korea. So Denmark, Finland, Sweden, Norway, and the Nordic countries are really moving ahead, and so they have come up with ambitious goals much earlier on. Regarding air pollution with the Nordic countries, I think there's a lot of room for collaboration, and there are a lot of things that we can learn from the Nordic countries. In fact, I had met with representatives with Denmark and Sweden during the COP26, and we talked about how we're going to move ahead. Thank you so much for your attention.